To a senior citizens forum presented by Benefits for You 2 Insurance Services. I'm Janice Wood, and today on the Senior Citizens Forum, our guest is David Libman. He's a real estate attorney, and in talking to him, he also does some business law. So he's not just restricted to real estate. But here at Benefits for You 2 Insurance Services, we specialize in Medicare insurance and in regular health insurance for those people who do not have Medicare. If you have Medicare, I have a client that called me up the other day, and she wanted to know how she could save some money on her prescription drugs. And I said, are you using a preferred pharmacy versus a standard pharmacy? And I researched, because every carrier has different pharmacies. I did that research for her to make sure she was using the correct pharmacy. If for regular health insurance, if you have health insurance through the exchanges, that means like Cover California or the health exchanges in some of the different parts of the country. Some of you may have seen that your premiums have gone down over the last couple of weeks. I had a client call me up, and we researched it. We found out he was one of the, I think it was 8 million people that were getting a decrease in premiums. And he was really excited because he was paying $257 a month, and now he's paying $89 for his premium. So he was really happy. So if you need any help in regard to that, please give me a call. But today we're going to talk more about real estate law. And David is somebody that who's really busy. I spoke with him maybe a couple of months ago and asked him if he would like to come on the show, because I know as seniors, a lot of us own property, and I've never needed a real estate lawyer, but sometimes things happen and you do have to have a real estate lawyer. But he's been busy, and I'm so excited that he's here with us today. A little bit that I know about David, and I hope to learn more, is that he's lived in, I guess, many different states in the country growing up. A lot of moving around as a child. Sometimes that can be challenging or interesting, depending upon personality, how that works, always being the new kid in class. So I know he knows how to adapt. Yeah, okay. And one of the things I found that David has a real interest in and has done, he's a musician. And I was impressed to find out that he went to Juilliard. That's really impressive, okay? And he plays the drums. Do you do any other instruments, David?
I'm a mediocre ukulele player. I picked that up later in life, so I'm enjoying learning that. So okay. It's not as loud as the drums, so I can practice it later in the evening. So that works out well. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. And his wife of over 25 years is also a drummer. Is that correct?
When we met, we're coming up on our 25th anniversary this year, and when we met, we were both professional drummers.
Okay, so that must have made for an interesting courtship.
Yeah, yes, and she was patient enough wife to be with me throughout law school and becoming an attorney and all of those transitions. So yes, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that sounds like fun, and you have two grown sons, one already out of college and off on his own, and sounds like he's successful. And you also have a son who's finishing up at
yeah, we have one. So we have the older one's an animator for Netflix. He's out of school. The younger one goes to Sonoma State, although with the pandemic, lately going to Sonoma State has been being in his room doing Zoom like this throughout the day. So I'm hopeful that his final year of college, he'll actually be able to go back physically to Sonoma State and enjoy that up there. Yeah.
Because that's a whole experience on its own, going to university.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
Yeah. So David, how did you get into real estate?
I got into real estate. I had been an attorney for a while at firms. And when you're at a firm, the kind of work I was doing a lot of litigation, and a lot of it involved business or real estate things. And then at a point, it's about 7 years ago, I decided to go out on my own, because I had become a partner at my firm. And I realized that other than getting an assigned parking spot, that it seemed like it would be more fruitful to go out on my own, which was proved to be true. And I've always enjoyed being a solo attorney from that point on. And when I got into some networking and starting to meet people, I found that there was a lot of need for somebody who knew how to deal with real estate issues. And in some ways, it kind of ballooned on itself, because a lot of real estate issues are business or estate issues, which is work I had done already. Because maybe if there's a business issue, it could be a lease, or there's purchase and sale transactions. There's a lot of things that come up with real estate. Or same thing with family disputes. People, maybe there's an inheritance dispute, or between beneficiaries and a trustee about real estate, and these kind of things come up. There's just example after example where things come up, where negotiations for either renting or selling real estate, or splitting it up, or how do you avoid getting it reassessed too much? These things come up over and over again. So as I started to do that as a solo attorney for people, I kept getting referrals for more work like that. And so it's just been kind of an enjoyable, easy flowing process to get into doing that more and more.
Okay. Well, let's start with something simple question, okay? Which a lot of people, we talk about wills and trust. I've had another attorney on who's talked about wills and trust. But when we had our conversation the other day, we talked about, what if my real estate property is not put in, I have that will and trust, but it's never been filed legally with the county.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. With that, now I would need an attorney at that point?
You would. So if you've got that problem, and it's a great example. So there, in California, you have a probate process, and it's sort of a complicated thing. But if you have a will and you leave property only through your will, not through a trust, when you die, if your property is worth more than about $162,000, you're going to have to go through probate, meaning your estate will go through probate. And that's a court process. It takes time. There are statutory fees. There are appraisals that are required. So not only does it take more time and cost more money, but you end up netting less from the real estate. Now, on the other hand, if you have a trust, the reason people set up trusts primarily is to avoid probate. I mean, there's other reasons, of course, but it's essentially like a will, but because it's a trust, you can avoid probate. But what people don't realize sometimes, because I do estate plans sometimes for people because of the real estate aspect, is that when you set up a trust and you have that nice piece of paperwork that says you've got your trust, it doesn't really mean anything until you actually fund it with assets. And in order to get real estate into a trust, you have to do a deed where you transfer your property from, say, Janice Wood, the individual, to Janice Wood as trustee of the Janice Wood Trust. And that I do for people all the time. I can do the deed. There's paperwork that goes with the deed that needs to be submitted to the county. And the paperwork has to be filled out correctly so that you don't get reassessed. If you do it the right way, you can transfer property from yourself to your trust and you'll get no reassessment in property taxes. So that is one of the services that I provide.
So if somebody is sitting there with a will and trust that hasn't been reviewed in 5, 10, 15, 20 years, they need to go back and make sure that their real estate property has been filed correctly with that deed.
That's exactly so. I just had a client last week that he's been relatively successful with some real estate things. And so when he set up his trust originally, the property he had at the time was placed into his trust. But then, he bought and sold, and now he's sitting in his house, and his house wasn't properly in his trust, and he's older. And if he died, that would go through probate, even though he thought, oh, I've got a trust I'm taken care of. So it's always good to kind of, if you don't move and you don't do anything and you set up your thing in your trust and nothing's changed in your life, maybe you're okay. But a lot of times certain things have changed in people's lives, and it's good to review that to make sure that your ducks are in a row.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's always interesting. Now, the other thing, now if I'm using here in California, I know if I wanted to buy a piece of property, okay, I know I don't need to use a real estate attorney, okay. But if I lived in Florida or I believe New York, they require a real estate attorney. So why is there that difference? Just the law.
Some of it, and I've asked people in other states, it depends on the state. In California, and I think it's a good system, if things go swimmingly in a real estate transaction, then you've got your broker, and your broker represents you, and there's an escrow company, and all of the money that's going to sort of transfer when the sale closes goes through escrow. So for the most part, those transactions don't need attorneys. Lately, I've been involved because it's been a hot seller's market. I've been more involved in some of those transactions than in the past, because what happens even in California is if there's a dispute that develops between a buyer and a seller, and that could be over anything. Somebody does an inspection and they find a problem with the property and they suddenly want a change in the price. Or somebody tries to back out of the transaction because they couldn't get their loan and they remove contingencies. And there's an issue with, do I get my, down payment back? When those kind of disputes come up, there's a mediation and arbitration provision in most of these real estate contracts. And that's where the attorneys get involved, because we need to help resolve the disputes. And most real estate agents or brokers back out. They're not resolving those disputes because most of their practice is about closing the sale, not resolving the disputes. So attorneys get involved on the dispute part and resolving them here. But in other states, attorneys do the whole deal of closing and almost act in some capacities doing things that escrow companies or real estate brokers do out here.
Now, when you work with people, now I know people that are moving into California, out of California, are you finding that you have to work in different states?
I don't. I mean, I'm a California attorney, so I don't. I will deal with their California issues. If they have a real estate issue out of state, I'm happy to chat with them. But most of the time, if it's going to be out of state, I will refer them to an attorney in that state, because each jurisdiction has maybe specific local rules. And real estate, unlike some other forms of law, if you have a lawsuit regarding, say, a piece of property, it's going to be venued in the county where that property sits. So, on other issues, like, I do some business stuff. So if I had a contract dispute with somebody from San Francisco, I still might be able to sue them down here from Southern California in a Southern California court. But if I have a dispute with somebody in San Francisco regarding San Francisco real property, I'm going to have to do that in San Francisco. Now, as a California attorney, I could do that, no problem. But if it was in Florida, they're going to need a Florida attorney.
So you're saying, or in California, each county can be different in the laws?
I mean, you might have some minor differences from county to county, but California has statewide laws that apply statewide. But what I'm saying is, if you get into, you kind of brought up a great example. If you get into a dispute that's, say, in some other state than California, it may not even be that they have an escrow company or use real estate brokers in the same way. They might be using attorneys for the closing. So you're better off to have an attorney if you're out of state that deals with that state's real estate practices.
Okay. Say I own a large apartment complex with several different partners in that complex. So I'm making up a number, 10 people. Mm-hmm. Okay. And all of a sudden, one of the partners wants nothing to do with this anymore. And now we have a conflict. I would go to you.
That would be a perfect referral. I mean, when you get an attorney for whatever, even real estate or not, you have to think about, are you dealing with a transaction that could potentially lead to litigation or not? Because some attorneys don't do any litigation. My practice is mixed. I do transactional work and I also do litigation. And so what you're talking about is
litigation, in case we have someone here that doesn't understand.
Litigation is a lawsuit. I mean, if everybody's getting along and there's no chance this thing is going to go to court and everybody's getting along swimmingly, then it's fine to get a lawyer that never does lawsuits. But if you have a chance that you have a lawsuit and you have an attorney that's good with lawsuits, first of all, good attorneys try to help people avoid having lawsuits if possible. Like your first thing is to try to resolve the dispute without the need to go to court. But you need to be willing to go to court if that can't happen. And you also need to understand what the threats are of a court action. So, for example, in the situation you're describing, California has a law called partition law, which basically says that if you're an owner of property and you want out for some reason, and you're not getting along with the other partners or owners of the property, you can file a lawsuit for partition, and that can force either a sale of the property where, you know, the proceeds are split, or it can force a division if the property can be physically divided into different parts. Probably in an apartment building, it could potentially force a sale. Because most of the time other owners don't necessarily want a sale, usually the threat of that sort of lawsuit or beginning that sort of lawsuit will help lead to a settlement. And so it's good to have an attorney that understands that process to try to settle it. So case in point, I just had a client recently, and this happens kind of frequently, where boyfriend and girlfriend buy property together. They think they're going to get along great and everything's going to go fine. And then things go sour and they break up, but they're still entitled to the property. And, you know, in this case, I represented the girlfriend. The boyfriend would not get off the property. We first tried to negotiate kindly to have him agree to deed over his property. No. Then we filed a partition lawsuit, and now he's much more interested because he doesn't want to be involved in litigation in deeding over his property. So, you know, usually that leads to some sort of a settlement. And, you know, I've done those kind of cases multiple times.
Okay. Now that could be like, even if you own like a commercial buildings,
anything where you've got joint ownership. Exactly.
Anything type of joint ownership.
Yes.
Yeah. What about property lines? Do you ever have people argue over whose property line is?
I do get that. It's funny. You would think it would be more often than it is. Sometimes you get it. A lot of times you'll get neighbors where somebody thinks, oh, my property line is 1 foot further than the other one. And usually what happens with those cases, I'll get into the negotiation. Sometimes the property line part of it is not so much resolved as the dispute is resolved, because people don't, when you get into a property line dispute, besides the attorneys and the litigation costs, you've got surveys you've got to do, you've got all these expenses you have to incur. So people really have to think about whether it's worth it to go through that kind of dispute and lengthy process for, say, an extra foot in their backyard. Or, you know, I suppose if it's commercial property, it comes up, but not as often as you think. But yes, I do them, but it's not a big part of my practice.
Okay, because I would think that I know when I have bought property and sold property, it's in there.
Yeah.
Exactly what the property is.
I mean, I've got one going right now where I've got two neighbors, and my client built his fence a foot shy of the property line. And he doesn't get along with the neighbor. So we actually got a restraining order against the neighbor because there was a lot of disputes there. But one of the issues that won't be a restraining order, it'll be a later lawsuit, is this issue of the neighbor encroaching 1 foot in the backyard because the fence is shy, and the sort of trespass property line issue. That'll be a longer lawsuit. It's unfortunate, but it's better if you can get those resolved without a lawsuit. This one we can't. But if you can without a lawsuit, which you can come to an attorney for that. It's still good to get an attorney because a lot of times things are resolved with a settlement agreement and you have terms that people agree upon, which is, why you get an attorney, because sometimes it gets so heated, you need a third party attorney on each side to deal with sort of getting the deal that people can live with.
Yeah, I know I had something similar. I wanted to rebuild a fence. Mm-hmm. And the original fence was on the property lines between the two properties, and he decided he didn't want the fence on his property.
Oh, okay.
Okay. So I built the fence on my property. Okay. And then I don't want to go into it, but I never used an attorney because it wasn't worth it. I just have a smaller flower bed. That's all.
Well, see, that
but
kind of
but when I go to sell the house, that may be an issue.
Right.
Yeah.
It could. I mean, but in a sense, I think you handled that well, because would it be worth it to go through a whole lawsuit over that little extra part of your flower bed?
Right.
Probably not.
No.
Yeah.
No. Yeah. But it's just, sometimes you can have a difficult neighbor.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Now, I did have one. I mean, you bring it up. It was interesting that we resolved a while back where I had a client where part of their backyard there was an easement from the city for a while, and then the city stopped maintaining it. And we came to find out that the city had decided to give up that easement. And so we did a little negotiation with the city, and suddenly my client got a much bigger backyard once we, did some back and forth, because the city had given up that easement. So my client was able to extend their fence back further. Okay. So that's a happy result. Yeah.
Now that brings up another thing.
Yeah.
I know a lot of people have the sidewalk going through the property, and then you have where the tree and the whatever you have on there. Now, it used to be grass. Everybody would have some kind of grass on the city property.
Uh-huh.
Okay. I know I took out the grass, put in natural stuff. But do property owners ever get into it with the city that they live, the municipality that they live with?
They do. Sometimes they do that. The one that I find that happens more often than that, and the reason it does, the city, whatever the city's rules are, there's a reason for that phrase, you don't fight City Hall. Because most of the time you're not going to win with City Hall, right? If it's the rule, it's the rule, whatever it is. HOA disputes, though, are big. Because HOAs have their rules and things about sidewalks, and there's a lot of politics with the HOAs, or sometimes people don't follow the rules that the actual HOA sets up, or you get power brokers with these boards that aren't doing the right things. So those kind of disputes come up frequently. And
you're going to find HOAs in what? Gated communities?
Yeah, but more than gated communities, there's a lot of communities in Southern California that aren't even gated, but still have homeowners associations.
Okay.
Or there's also like condos that have them too, Mm-hmm. And it can be any number of things. It can be, I had a guy recently, well, I guess it's about 2 years ago. He had one kind of beige paint. This shows you how ridiculous these things get. He had one kind of beige paint on his house that was approved when he painted it. Then they got a new HOA association, and they had a different kind of beige paint that you had to repaint with. So he couldn't repaint his house the same color it was already painted, because they had changed the guidelines for what he had to paint to. And there was a negotiation on that we did. So it can be something as silly as that. And then it can be bigger things, like maybe the HOA is supposed to maintain a common area and they don't. And what do you do about that? Like it's affecting your property value. And what do you do about those things? So people come to an attorney, and we will review the CC&Rs. A lot of times they have other HOA rules. Another one that comes up a lot is people want to make improvements or changes to their house, and we need to make a negotiation, make sure that the HOA will approve that. How does that work? And how do we get to it? So those are the kind of things that come up.
Now, I had my youngest son's grandmother, lived up in Ranchos Palos Verdes, and they had a common area where everybody used the same swimming pool.
Okay.
And I don't know what happened, but all of a sudden the swimming pool wasn't taken care of, and nobody wanted to take care of it. And could they have gone to an attorney to try to resolve that? That's a common area.
Yeah, that they could, and they probably should, because interestingly, a lot of the times, ultimately, even though it's real estate, these are still contract issues, right? That's why I do a lot of business stuff, because the first part of that has to do with what is required of the HOA and are they doing it? And that's going to be buried in some CC&Rs or rules. And then the second part of it is, how do you resolve that dispute? And a lot of times there's sort of an alternative dispute resolution procedure. It might be in the CC&Rs. There's also code sections in California that cover that if it's not in the CC&Rs. And so you need an attorney that can help help you navigate, what do you do next? Where do you do
CC&R?
That's the codes and regulations. And so it's basically like the rule book for a homeowners association of what sort of rules do they have in that neighborhood? Can you have a motorhome out front? Can you put a balcony upstairs? Like all kinds of, depending on, it's always different. It's not the same. So people will come up against rules that they think, oh, that couldn't possibly be a rule. I had a guy that wanted to get a Sprinter van. And that, we had to look through the CC&Rs because they were saying it's an RV and he was saying, no, it's a personal van. What is it? Like those kind of things. Yeah.
Yeah, because I know I've been into some condo complexes where they have specific areas where you can wash your car.
Exactly.
Wash it anywhere.
Right.
Now, what about commercial property? Now, like some of these strip malls or these malls, does that ever create real estate attorneys' needs in that area also?
Oh yeah, I mean that's a large part of my practice. Like the prime example in the last year, for example, was with all of the COVID restrictions, a lot of commercial leases, the tenants lacked the ability to pay rent. So I represented some tenants and also some landlords. I mean, on the landlord side, the landlord's trying to figure out what to do to get paid, right? Mm-hmm. And on the tenant side, the tenant's trying to figure out how to pay. So in some cases, for example, I had a few restaurant clients where we had to negotiate new lease terms, discounted rent for a period of time, that sort of thing. Or, I had situations where we negotiated actual terminations of the lease. And then on the flip side, sometimes with the landlord, you have to figure out, what's the best way to deal with this tenant to recoup as much money or to let them go, or how can we make this work? So there's been a lot of challenges. And that one's been very fluid because of the fact that with COVID, the rules have changed, some weekly and sometimes monthly, in terms of what's allowed and what's not allowed. And our tenant's going to be protected and our landlord's going to be protected.
Okay.
Yeah.
Now, do you work with people who manage those properties, type commercial properties?
I do. What I find with the commercial properties a lot of the time is that when you begin the negotiation, most of them have a property management company that's assigned as the property manager. And if it's an important enough deal, at some point in the communications, usually rather early on, I'll get introduced to the actual owner and you negotiate with the owner on those kind of things. But it can be both. But most property management companies, since their function is more just the day-to-day of sort of collecting rent and dealing with tenants on the day-to-day, when it gets bigger to a dispute, I notice the owners step in more often than not, or the owner's attorney.
Yeah. But you're reminding me, I had a client who had no support, she didn't have very much money, okay?
Right.
And she had no family to help support her. She was like in her 90s.
Okay.
And I had some family that lived in a different part of the country call me up and say, can you help her out? She really trusts you. I'm just an insurance agent. But she got an eviction notice. I mean, and she was living on something like $800 a month. That's
right.
What her social. And of course, we couldn't afford a real estate attorney at that time. And I went to you know, oh, I'm losing it. Legal aid to help out. And they weren't much of a help, but the poor thing was like put out on the street. I don't know what happened in the long run, but if you're in that type of a situation, do you help people out if all of a sudden they're being evicted and they've lived in the same place for 30 years and they've been paying their rent? Is that an issue that you work with?
I do sometimes. I make a few distinctions in my personal practice with the commercial and the residential. On the residential side, most of the time I represent landlords, not tenants. And the reason is, frankly, if it's a tenant that can't pay, most of the time they will eventually get evicted. That's just the reality. And so I don't feel it's that much bang for the buck for them. I chat with tenants all the time. I'll do a free consultation and chat with them and give them some free advice. But most of the time I don't find it's that much value for them if they're not paying rent to hire an attorney, because they're going to get evicted eventually. So why should they be spending on the attorney? On the landlord end, I can help, because sometimes you have problem tenants. And I mean, people don't realize landlords have mortgages to pay. So if their tenant doesn't pay rent, the landlord can't pay the mortgage a lot of the time unless they own it outright. That's an issue. On the commercial end, I represent both landlords and tenants because those issues are more complicated, and it's usually something different than just an inability to pay rent. Commercial tenants are usually bigger or sophisticated enough sometimes that they still need and hire attorneys, which is, so it's equal. I don't distinguish too much on the commercial end, but on the residential end, it's usually landlords. Yeah.
Now my other question for you is, and I probably should have asked this way earlier, is that I, as a senior, I decided to sell my home, and selling my home, I'm now contingent on buying another piece of property somewhere else, and my buyer, who's given me a down payment, backs out, and everything goes the wrong way.
Okay.
And my real estate person can't help me any longer.
Right.
So I'm going to call Dave up and say, help.
Exactly. That's where we get to what we were talking about earlier, right, which is that those real estate contracts have provisions on what you need to do next to try to resolve that. And a lot of it's going to depend on, did you remove contingencies, or do you still have an out of your contract, for example? And if you didn't, what are the facts here that might work in your favor? So, as an attorney, I've seen these situations over and over again, so I have a better ability, hopefully, to see the strengths and weaknesses in your position and negotiate an out. That's the goal, is to negotiate a way for you to get out of that and move on to something better. Now, I will say, and it's not for my benefit, a lot of times people, they have a friend that's, say, a real estate agent or a real estate broker that's not really a real estate broker thoroughly. What I mean by thoroughly is it's somebody that maybe does a few transactions a year, and they don't know how to deal with these situations or even how to see problems. So if you're going to be in a purchase and sale transaction, do yourself a favor and get yourself a very experienced real estate agent or broker, and ask them if they're a broker. Brokers have to take more tests and have even more qualifications. You'll avoid some of these problems and maybe never have to see an attorney if you have a very experienced real estate broker. And I know multiple real estate brokers, so sometimes if people call me and they need a referral, I'm happy to give it. I don't get anything for giving that referral, but I like to see people well represented if they can be.
Yeah. Well, yeah. You and I are both in the referral type.
Yeah.
Refer people all the time, so that's easy. It's I find it very rewarding to be able to refer someone to someone that I know personally and I can trust.
As do I. And I think, it all comes around. People refer to me, and I like the thought that somebody that I'm dealing with, if I can't help them, at least maybe I know somebody who can. So that's something I do.
So we're going to put up information on how to contact Dave. Do you have anything, and myself, of course, And you have anything you want to add to our conversation this morning, Dave?
No, it was a pleasure chatting with you. I just wanted to thank you for the opportunity. And I appreciate you putting up my contact information. And people should feel free to call me. Sometimes you're not sure if you need an attorney. I'm always happy to do a quick chat and say, hey, this is in my wheelhouse, this isn't in my wheelhouse, or, or whatever it is. And like I say, if it's something that requires an attorney and I could do it, I'm happy to work with people. And if it's not in my wheelhouse, I'm happy to refer it out. And if it's something where I think, hey, you shouldn't be wasting your time or money on this, I might tell you that too. So I do appreciate the opportunity to chat with you today.
Thank you. It's been a lot of fun. As always, I enjoy doing these shows immensely. One of the things I like to add, I know my targeted audience here is 55 and above, but the information that has been shared here today, you can share that with your other individuals that you may know that are younger. They can use this information because it doesn't matter if you're 20 and you're buying your first piece of property, or you're 80 and you're buying a piece of property or selling a piece of property, or if you have a dispute over property. You could always use a real estate attorney for some of that help. So please share this information. You're going to find this is going to be on Facebook. It's going to be on Instagram, LinkedIn. And we post this in YouTube. And you are going to start being able to find this on podcasts. So it's going to be really good information that you can find from us. So if you need to find out how to locate us on any of those, please contact me and I will tell you how you can find us. So Dave, thank you again.
Thank you.
I really appreciate it and have a great day. And